everybody, and welcome to Chillin' with the Villain. I am your host, the one true villain, Marty Skirl, and joining me today, as always, is the producer of the show, Mr. Samuel Scott. And today, we're doing something a little bit different. Yes. Typically in wrestling, and especially in today's day and age, there can be a lot of negativity when it comes to pro wrestling, or at least a lot of back and forth, and you hear this word tribalism a lot in pro wrestling, and people arguing everything else. And typically, if there's wrestling news, it's not necessarily positive news, at least all the time. And it got me thinking, I want to spread some positivity, and that's what we like to do here on the podcast. At the same time, we're not here putting everything over, but we give our fair critique. And but generally, I feel like we're very positive here on the show. And it got me thinking. It's like, what do I actually love about professional wrestling? And I thought, that's quite a loaded question. And I thought, rather than me just answering it and Sam just answering it, why don't I ask all of you, the Chillains, the listeners to the podcast, why you love professional wrestling? So I put out a question on Instagram and got a very overwhelmingly response, like way, way, way more than I thought I would. And so many people had so many different takes and reasons why they love professional wrestling. And so today I figured we would share them, or as many as we can, or the best ones, and maybe discuss them. And then I guess maybe myself and Sam will answer why we love professional wrestling, if Sam even does, at the end of the show. Sam, how are you doing today?
Yes, not too bad. I feel like we're having another heat wave. Maybe that's a sign we should cover ECW again in the future.
Uh-oh.
The AC's out. We haven't had that happen for a good amount of time. But apart from that, everything's going pretty well. What about you?
I was expecting you, after me saying, we're really positive on the show, then to ask you, how are you going? And they're like, I'm crap.
My AC's broken.
Yes, I'm doing pretty good, thanks.
There we go.
Well, let's just get straight into it. So, like I said, I asked out on the Instagram, why do you love professional wrestling? His_will_be_done, his will be done, says the non-verbal storytelling in the ring, brackets, a lost art. Now, well, that was quite an interesting answer. And honestly, like, spoiler alert, there is a lot of answers that suggest the storytelling. This one was the first one I just read out, and he says in brackets, a lost art. Do we agree with that the story in the ring is a lost art in professional wrestling right now?
I think we'd agree with the first part of his comment, like without a doubt, like the non-verbal storytelling is like a great aspect of pro wrestling. It's kind of unique to it as well, to the format. So I think we've got no doubts in like whether we agree with him or there. The second half, is it a lost art? That is, I don't think it is. Like, you may differ. You're a performer, so you're going to have to come at these questions like with two minds, right? As a fan and as a performer. But for me, like, watching it, I don't think it's a lost art. I don't know. Like, maybe there is a difference. I haven't picked up on it because I haven't watched like too much classic stuff. Why don't you tell me? What do you think as a fan and then as a performer?
Well, I feel like ultimately that's all professional wrestling is telling stories, right? Whether it's through the storylines, through the promos, through the matches, it is storytelling. And I think what his will be done is getting at is, in this day and age of wrestling, there's a lot more focus on sort of the in-ring athleticism. At the same time, it feels like it all comes back to telling a story. So I understand kind of where they're coming from, but at the same time as well, I think, there's still a lot of great wrestling out there, and we've got a lot of great wrestlers that can tell great stories. And I feel like we're guilty of this as well. And that's kind of why we started this podcast, is the idea of like romanticizing wrestling from the past, or wrestling nostalgia. And actually, if you go back and you look and watch, it's like, oh, not everything was as great as I thought. we've reviewed a bunch of like Attitude Era pay-per-views, and the majority of those matches aren't telling stories, that's for sure. So I understand what they're getting at. And I would agree that there's definitely more of a focus now on the athleticism. I would say, actually, maybe now more than ever, maybe too many matches are trying to tell the same story.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, we've also in recent years had some amazing stories, whether it's been the Bloodline, the Sami Zayn with the Bloodline, Cody Rhodes and his story, the stuff with CM Punk, Drew McIntyre, in AEW have done a bunch of great stuff, with the Elite and Hangman, and so there definitely is still great stories. So yeah, I don't necessarily think it's a lost art. Could some people be doing better at it? Maybe, but ultimately for me, wrestling is storytelling. We make movies, you know what I mean?
Right. I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure I agree with it simply because let's say there is a focus on the actual like in-ring athleticism nowadays. I'm not really sure it's a zero-sum game and you lose the like the non-verbal storytelling aspect. I think like we have both. So maybe maybe I'm reading wrong into the insinuation, but it sounds like that's like what they're saying, and I'm just not sure I feel that when I watch it, especially nowadays.
Sport, soccer, football, it's an athletic contest, and they're not trying to, but typically a football match, their story is kind of being told, huh? Like, what's the story? Well,
I guess
Newcastle won 3-1. Do you know what I mean? And so yeah, we got to move on. I'm going to get this name wrong. Luca Valentino 99. The fact that it brings so many people together. I've met some of the best people because of it. I thought that was a really lovely answer. Kind
of sweet, yeah.
Yes, and that I can completely agree with. I have the majority of my best friends I have met through professional wrestling, actually doing it, I guess. But even when I was a young kid, I bonded with friends over the love of pro wrestling and being a pro wrestling fan. And I feel like that is a big thing for wrestling fans now, that they can kind of, especially in this day and age, they can actually have a community of people, like-minded people. Back in the day, when I was a big wrestling fan at school, you kind of had to find the other kids that liked it. But now I guess they can speak to other wrestling fans.
Online communities.
Yeah. Dude, I remember getting the AOL chat rooms and talking to people about pro wrestling on there and everything else. So yeah, I think that's a beautiful and lovely answer. Reaper Fairy 27, I think that's right, says, so this kind of contradicts the first one, the athleticism.
Okay.
So again, I think that's, me, I love old-fashioned storytelling, but at the same time, I think the athleticism is certainly something that I appreciate. When I was younger, and I'd been watching wrestling for a matter of years, when I started seeing these more athletic wrestlers, guys like Rey Mysterio and Rob Van Dam, those kind of guys, I was, later, like Jody Fleisch, those guys, my mind was kind of blown by this high-flying wrestling, and I was very excited by it. So I can completely, AJ Styles and all these guys, I can completely understand the athleticism in wrestling being a reason why you love it. Absolutely. The person _ named Derek, seeing random people become larger-than-life characters. Now, that
we love a larger-than-life character.
We do, and it's funny because you people will know that I love old world of sport wrestling, and a lot of the wrestlers on there were just pretty much dudes just wrestling.
Everyday folk, yeah.
Right, but typically the wrestlers that I did love were the larger-than-life characters, and even if they weren't, they might not have been dressed up as garbage men or being undertakers or whatnot or clowns, but they still had big larger-than-life personalities. And I think especially, well, even if you look back in wrestling history, look back at Gorgeous George as such a larger-than-life character. I feel like without these larger-than-life characters, you're just watching two guys in trunks pretending to fight. So again, it's pretty key, don't you think?
Oh, totally. Yeah, it's absolutely the piece that holds it all together.
I mean,
the central point. Yeah, totally.
Yeah, your larger than life characters, your favorites. Goldust, certainly larger than life.
Certainly.
IRS, pretty larger than life.
Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Ultimate Warrior. Look at that.
It's kind of like what differentiated someone like Hogan to a I can't even think of anyone, like a Tom Zink. You know what I mean? It's like Hogan's just so larger than life. Do you know what I mean? Like, I remember the first time I got a video cassette with Hogan on the front cover. I think it was the first time I ever saw him. Just this big, ginormous, jacked, red, shiny man. I think he was lifting a barbell or something, or bending a pipe. I can't remember exactly. But I remember seeing that and just being like, what is that? And my mind being blown. And just the same as when I first saw The Undertaker. It was obviously old school Undertaker. And I just, and watching Kamala being scared and running away from him, just like, you're watching this and you're thinking like, what is this? There really isn't anything like this. Do you know what I mean? I'd say larger than life characters, and you could maybe argue that's less of a thing now. Maybe wrestling goes for more of a real
grounded approach. Yeah.
Yes. But what I find interesting is I still feel the most over wrestlers typically are the larger than life characters, even if it's not so obvious. Let's say something like someone like an MJF. He hasn't got an over the top gimmick, but he's definitely a larger than life character.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. Yeah. Roman Reigns.
Yes, absolutely. Ambient Muse. It connects me to both my grandfather, who's passed, and my son, who is named after him. Oh, that's lovely.
We like that one. Yeah. Whose granddads didn't love wrestling? Maybe that's a British thing, but I don't know. Americans let us know. But like, I feel like everyone's granddad loved wrestling in the UK when I was growing up.
I remember watching. I put wrestling on when I was at my my granddad's house, and the wrestling came on was Kane giving Tori a tombstone, and my granddad just kept being like, "If this was real, she'd be dead. She'd be dead." So, but yeah,
I was talking more like World of Sport. Like granddads used to eat that up.
Well, yes, that's what they'd always bring it back to, for sure. Brando Cash, the storytelling and the emotion it delivers to the people. Emotion's a good word. Von Crow PW, the mix of characters and athleticism. Siono, you probably should have read these out. Siono Beer, the escapism, just seeing modern day tellings of good versus evil and being caught up in the emotions. Now, I feel like this is a good one because that kind of gets back to
classic theatre. Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's kind of, we had a bit of a debate quite a few weeks ago now when we were discussing the AEW Dynasty pay-per-view. And I kind of suggested that, for me, pro wrestling is just like the most best and beautiful example of good versus evil. And for me, that's kind of what I love in professional wrestling. And you were kind of suggesting, there can be heels that are also loved, which is certainly true. And you made the reference to Darth Vader and everything else. And my argument was like, sure, but I would rather that be the exception than the rule. This is one thing I do think is to a degree missing from this day and age of wrestling is the good versus evil. It seems it's classic, very blurred.
Yeah, good versus evil tale. Yeah.
Yeah, like when they had Hogan versus Sergeant Slaughter, there was no doubt who was the good guy and who was the bad guy. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like there's definitely room for that gray area. But ultimately, I still feel like the best stories in wrestling are good versus evil. Right. I really, really do. But in this day and age, I feel like it's probably impossible to really have that fully be a thing because just wrestling fans are, quote unquote, smarter than ever before. And the wrestling fan now is kind of very much like, I'm not going to be told who to like. I'm going to like who I like. And it's so hard now, the fact that wrestling is so open. And so people kind of, they're aware that it's a show. They're probably, someone could be a great heel on TV, but then the fans will, follow them on social media and they seem like a really nice person.
A cool guy, yeah.
Yeah, a cool guy or a great family man. So it's very difficult. Rai Solo says the over-the-top characters and action, it's like if EastEnders had a baby with Power Rangers. Both of which I watched religiously as a child, by the way. Power Rangers, I feel like that was my thing as a kid. I was just very, very into anything that had to do with fighting. And I don't know if this is because my dad wasn't around and I had sort of no male role model whatsoever. I honestly think it was anything to do with fighting. I was obsessed with Power Rangers. I was obsessed with wrestling.
Mortal Kombat, wrestling.
I was obsessed with Mortal Kombat, even like Street Fighter, etc. Later Tekken. I was very much into that combat, but not necessarily. It's funny though, because I was into all that, right? Power Rangers, but not really into, let's say, boxing or mixed martial arts or anything else. So there's
the fantasy element that tied it
exactly, totally.
That one that was read out is more closely aligned to like how I my feeling of it, which we'll get to at the end. But he's basically taken the words out of my mouth on that.
For those that don't, for those that don't know, EastEnders is a soap opera in the UK. I'm trying to think, what's the US equivalent to EastEnders?
I don't know, but I don't think there are soap operas here. And if there are, I wouldn't know what they are. But like telenovelas, if you know what they are, like that sort of thing. But ours are more kind of like less bombastic and they're more depressing. In the UK, I'd say. Yeah.
Well, Shane Sagar, sorry. He kind of suggests what we've just been saying. He said wrestlers are real life superheroes / villains. And I think that's all these things we're mentioning, I think are all just, parts of the ingredients that make professional wrestling what it is. And again, without the wrestlers being superheroes or supervillains, we're not left with a whole much, so that's certainly the case. John McCann ProRes says the ability to impact and allow someone to escape and enjoy for 2 hours is what I love about pro wrestling. That word
I would agree, but I wouldn't agree with 2 hours.
Why? Because it's 4 or 5 hours.
4 hours, yeah. Other than that, I agree.
Yeah, and it is, isn't it? I think pro wrestling, we've got to remember it's a form of entertainment. And I just remember years ago, I had a friend that was just so obsessed with football or soccer to our US audience. And I've always been, I've always enjoyed football.
Yeah.
But I don't follow it all the time. But when I do, I really enjoy it. More so when I was much younger. But I asked him, not that I was questioning him, but I asked him, I was just interested. I said, what is it about soccer, football that you just love so much? He goes, honestly, I've got a full-time job. I've got a wife and kids at home and everything's pretty hectic in my life. But when I go to that game or I watch it on the TV for that 90 minutes, nothing else matters. And I'm just fully invested. And that's all that matters at the time. And that is escapism, isn't it?
Exactly. That's exactly why we do these things. Regardless of what form of entertainment you pick, it's why we do it. Yeah, for sure. Totally agree on that one.
We got some more answers. The stories, a solid in-ring story. AEW fan 916 says, I love all the different styles of wrestling.
Okay.
Which, I feel like that's something that we're the Classic Wrestling Podcast, but I don't want to seem like I'm just crapping on today's pro wrestling. I do feel like when I was younger, that was more of a thing where there was more defined styles, kind of like mixed martial arts. If you watch the first ever UFC, it had all these different fighting styles, and just over the years, it just merged into one like MMA style.
Yeah,
I feel like pro wrestling's kind of gone the same way, huh? That's kind of an interesting take, right?
Yeah, I think so. I agree with that to a certain extent. Yeah, definitely. There's obviously clear archetypes, but they're more like Rey Mysterio, but they're more like in character because, like you said, AJ Styles is also like similarly athletic. So yeah, no, I'd agree with you on that one. Yeah,
well, it's definitely interesting. If you think about it, if you look at wrestling from the 70s or the 80s, the luchadors were completely different to the British wrestlers and their style, completely different to the Japanese style, completely different to American style. And even in America, within the territories, all the styles of wrestling were completely different. Now, obviously, wrestling is just so much more worldwide. And in turn, that's kind of made it where there's more of a mixed style. Like you said, like AJ Styles, he, used to be you just have like a high flyer. But AJ, he can do it all. He's a high flyer. He's a technician. He's a brawler. He's a powerhouse. You know what I mean? So and that's kind of just how wrestling is these days. Vanda, let me look at this. people have funny names on Instagram. I guess
They do,
because
don't they? Yeah.
like your normal name just doesn't work. You type in Scott and it's like, no, you can't have that. You know what I mean? So they got to think of something funny. Vanda Lipandols. I'm sorry. I love the lifelong friendships, and that's another one. I think that's really sweet. X Donovan with a 0 instead of O. The physicality and the competitiveness of the matches, and I think the physicality is, like I said, for me as a kid, that was probably something that drew me to wrestling. You know, and I think that's physicality. I think is really important, and that's why I think a lot of the wrestlers that I really really loved were very physical, whether it was Bret the Hitman Hart or Eddie Guerrero, etc. So I would definitely agree with that. Y2 Garcia _ the good side of the community where you can share your love of it with people. Totally agree. And that's the thing. Wrestling, the online community, it's just like any other online community. It's unfortunate that just the natural road of even discussing anything with wrestling online always seems to go down a negative road, it seems. And I think that's just the internet as a whole. It always just seems to go that way. And you can find any wrestler ever of all time, and there's going to be people saying negative stuff about them online. Of course there is, So, and especially now with this wrestling with the tribalism, as they put it, and you get the other fans that say that just enjoy pro wrestling. But I feel like the tribalism, I don't think it's exclusive to wrestling. I'm sure.
Oh no, definitely
other
not.
sports,
video games,
movie,
any online community. Yeah,
exactly. Sure. People argue, I'm sure, all the time, like Xbox or PlayStation. Do you know what I mean? It's it is what it is. And to be honest with you, kind of had the same thing back in the day with WCW and WWE.
Yeah, and Sega and Nintendo and
totally
all of it, right?
It's just natural, I think. Don't you think?
I think so.
It's just a natural thing. Archer 23 says it gives me an escape from my reality, and also has given me many good friends throughout the years. So we're getting a lot of this escapism and a lot of people becoming friends. Be this person CMC Mexi or CM Smexy being able to watch people who are just like me but become successful. That's another thing with wrestling. I think the connection with a wrestler, that's always nice, being able to like go along for the ride with a pro wrestler on their journey. And what I kind of think that's why Cody Rhodes has worked so well in WWE.
Yes.
And maybe not like his WWE run, I think you can certainly agree, has probably been better than his AEW run. And AEW, I guess he kind of came in on top, kind of had nowhere to go but down. Whereas in WWE, he's come in and just, climbed up the ranks, and that built a lot of equity with the audience. We've got a lot of similar answers here, like the stories, the personalities, the tradition, the courage to change with the times, the storytelling, more escapism, and the story, the action. A well-told match can make you forget everything bad. This person, Rebel Go-To Bass, when will you come back to New Japan? By a New Japan fan. That was not what we were asking for. VQ, but I appreciate it. Actually, sorry, that sounded kind of rude. Who knows? Maybe one day. VQ, it's FUCCI. I don't want to say it.
Oh, no.
19, pro wrestling is a constant live action comic book and one of the greatest performance arts ever. And I think that's actually a really good point. That like there's no second takes with wrestling. Do you know what I mean? Once you're out there, you've got to go. And I think wrestling now more than ever is probably more rehearsed than it ever has been. But dude, when I was started wrestling, we didn't talk about our matches or plan our matches. We just said or got told, okay, the finish is him up with this. Okay. And we went in there and just worked, and it's so unique in that, like, I don't think there's anything you can really compare it with, because any sort of dance performance or whatnot has been choreographed, right? A stand-up comic,
he's written his set,
he's written his set and he's done it a whole bunch of times. I mean, that might be one of the closest things you could, because they do a lot of my favorite comics are ones that can improvise on the spot,
able to pivot,
yes,
play with the crowd, and
And that's what we have to do with pro wrestling.
Yeah, for
but
sure.
But like, how insane is it that I can fly to a random country, someone I've never met before, and then just talk briefly before the match, then go in there and just put on this performance with them and just trust them and everything else, and that's a shame as well when things go wrong, which it always is always going to happen. If people kind of crap on it, it's kind of like, well, it can happen. With wrestling, like I said, we don't get a second shot or anything else. So I think that's a beautiful, beautiful answer. Darby Allin's the extravagant / dramatic characters people choose and how they execute it. Okay. But Darby Allin's actually, they make a lot of shorts of me on Instagram, like little video packages. So thank you, nice. Darby Allin's. Not the Darby Allin, but Darby Allin's. I have lost where I am now.
Oh, we've got that many.
Dude, there are so many. The long stories with good build, like the 80s, not a 30-day cycle from OK Coral. Tiger Suplex, I can read that. Growing up, it was and still is an escape from life, like a portal into another world. G Money Studio says it gives me hope. That's kind of interesting, huh? The idea of giving, and I think a good example of that might be someone like a Sami Zayn or a Mick Foley, that underdog story.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And as for every sort of crazy larger than life character like a Brock Lesnar or a Hogan, wrestling also offers this sort of, the working man, someone like Eddie Kingston. And it makes you think, okay, it's just another way of telling great stories, I think. And this is what Real Falcon 5 says, like really being able to invest in someone's character. And that is just so important. It's really not about the moves and everything else, even though that's certainly a part of it. And they do help tell the story, but ultimately it's that investment in the characters. Again, without that, we've got nothing. And like we are all savages says it's a live performance art. It's so beautiful. Yep. It could be on Broadway. The battle between good and evil. So going back to that good and evil, which I was sort of having a little debate with you a few weeks ago, and I would like to hear more from the audience. Do you like your wrestlers to be kind of more
clearly defined
between good and evil, or is that an old trope that wrestling's moved on from? It's interesting. So like in Japan, for example, when I worked for New Japan, we didn't wrestling there. It was less good versus evil. And typically that there's still good and evil elements there, but that would normally be determined throughout the match, if that makes sense, and the story you tell in the match. But wrestlers
not so much
there,
the characters, you mean?
Yeah, wrestlers there, okay. They could do both good and kind of bad things, it seems. And it's kind of up to the audience to decide who they liked. And it's treated very much more like a sport there, so I guess that kind of makes sense. Michael Berg says how a group of indie guys could take the industry by storm and end up changing the world. So I guess he's referring to myself in the elite. So thank you, buddy. Some appreciation. We love it here on the podcast. I wanted to take a minute to talk about our newest sponsor, madcatbeardcare.com. Myself, I have a beard. Sam, you have a beard. Beards are very popular now, but you've got to take care of your beard. You got to get yourself over to madcatbeardcare.com. I'm looking at the oils and the balms on there. First of all, they're all designed by different pro wrestlers and marketed as different pro wrestlers. So there's a bunch of guys involved with this, like Matt Cardona, Brian Myers, Delirious, Jay Lethal, a whole collection of awesome wrestlers that have their own product on madcatbeardcare.com. Not only that, but a portion of the profits go to cat rescues around the country. So I think that's already exciting. But the beard oils and the balms both are made from organic argan oil, jojoba, and vitamin E, which when combined helps to soften, strengthen, and vitalize and stimulate circulation in the face, nourishing and strengthening the hair follicles to assist growth. Now, this is what you need. If you've got a patchy beard, you need to get yourself to madcatbeardcare.com. The balms also include the same oil and mixture as the oils, but he adds the shea butter, which helps alleviate itch and irritation to your face, while also helping control pesky stray hairs by allowing you to style them into place. He uses local organic beeswax that helps to get more of a hold to your style. So you got to look after your skin underneath your beard just like you do your scalp. Like, these aren't things that you can neglect. And that's why we've teamed up with madcatbeardcare.com. And right now, just for listening to the show, you can get yourself a whopping 15% off products at madcatbeardcare.com by using the code VILLAIN. That's 15% for the promo code VILLAIN. That's VILLAIN. Pick yourself up the Villain's Curse, my own beard oil, my own beard balm. That's exactly what I use every day on my face to make my famous beard look beautiful. You can do the same thing too. So last time I'm going to say it, get yourself over now to madcatbeardcare.com. Promo VILLAIN. Jimmy Dale Lone Wolf, the use of psychology, how certain artists can work the crowd. To me, it's not athletic, it's charisma. Working the crowd. Who do you feel like was the best wrestler ever at working the crowd?
You know, I want to say, I know this may sound ridiculous, but when you brought up Leon Harris and like just watching like that, it was very pantomimey, but like we still quote it and I found myself doing it. So from that aspect, I would honestly say like something like that. And I know it's incredibly camp, pantomimey, and very basic if you want to call it that. But for me, that kind of thing works. So like that kind of classic interaction where you're literally just calling out to the audience, I kind of enjoy. Yeah.
Well, it's funny because that sort of old British wrestling, you look at someone like working the crowd is a completely different thing from, let's say, the WWF who are running arenas and stadiums. And this old British wrestling, they're working in smaller buildings with maybe, 400 or 500 people. And it could be a lot more sort of one-on-one working the crowd. And that's why in the old British wrestling, you would see the granny come out and try and beat up the wrestlers
with her purse,
with her purse or her walking stick. Because
I guess,
go on, sorry.
No, go on.
To me, the first person that comes to mind at working the crowd, I feel, is Hogan.
Rock. Oh, okay.
And Rock. And I mean, Rock was also my second choice. But I think in the ring, Hogan working the crowd, just whether it's his hulking up or whatever he does, he is working the crowd from start to finish. From the moment he goes through that curtain to he goes back through it, he's just a master at working the crowd. And you can hear people say like, I don't think he's a good wrestler. He's not a good wrestler. He only knows 4 moves or whatever it might be.
Yeah.
But ultimately, it's like, well, what is wrestling? And he's one of the best to ever do it, just working the crowd. Go watch that Rock and Hogan match from WrestleMania 18. Yeah. If you, everyone says this, if you watch it with the sound off, you're kind of like, whatever. But watch it with the sound on, and you're just like, whoa, this is crazy. You know what I mean? John Star says, I've watched with the same friends and my brother since I was 6 years old. So it seems like a lot of people watch wrestling together, which I think is just, beautiful. The emotions that you guys make us feel, it's a beautiful art from Illmatic Souls. Life of Chris NZ. It is an art form of storytelling and highs and lows. It can be a simple 10 minutes or a year-long story. And that's the thing with pro wrestling as well. It's a never-ending thing, huh? Like it just keeps going constantly and going, right?
Forward, yeah.
There's no seasons or anything else. It just keeps going. Zay Kefa 04, the way it still makes me feel like a kid again at the end of the day. We talk about that a lot. I feel that. Yeah. The nostalgia, huh?
Yeah, I think so.
Like when, let's say, Stone Cold Steve Austin comes back and he does an entrance, and that's why he gets such an insane pop pass. Right. Like, whoa, like, why is that? It's just like, yes, this is my childhood right in front of me right now. And people do that, and I'm guilty of it. You clutch on to sort of nostalgia and things, For me, for example, I have the whole figure collection of the WWF Hasbro figures.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And the reason why I do is because as a kid, I had a handful of them, which were bought from boot sales because I was a poor kid. for our US audience, boot sales, kind of like thrift markets, thrift stores,
or flea markets.
flea markets. And I couldn't really afford any, all the wrestling figures I wanted. So as I got older and earned a bit of money, I was like, okay, I'm going to get all those figures that I wanted as a child. I'll get them now. So, and it's all about nostalgia. It really is. Gino, oh, this is a long one. I'm so sorry for everyone whose names I'm getting wrong. Gino on Greg in Aldo 2.0. The meet and greets, especially at indie shows.
Okay.
I like that. And, I say that a lot to promoters where, let's say I'm wrestling on a show and they'll say something like, oh, don't do the meet and greet before, we do it like after the show or something like that. And often I'll say to them, listen, this is an indie show. Like, of course, they're going to want to watch the matches and everything else. But a lot of the people here, the biggest part is actually just meeting one of their favorite wrestlers. That's the highlight of the event. Do you know what I mean? Like, that's just as important, if not more important, than watching the show. Do you know what I mean? And I know that because I experienced it as a fan. And for anyone that's listening that's met me before, again, I'm putting myself over here, but I try and go above and beyond with any fan that I get to meet, because to me it's such an honor that someone would take their time to watch me perform and everything else. And I just want every fan to know, and especially if they're paying to meet me, which is still blows my mind. But I just want them all to know just how much I appreciate it. Like, I should be paying you guys. Do you know what I mean? Now I'm going to have fans come up to me like, come on, Marty, give me money.
Where's my money?
Yes. But I always try to go above and beyond, because a lot of these fans, I'll get messages or comments on social media just saying, oh, Marty, I met you 6 years ago and I remember this and it was so funny. And and they still remember it, and it's like, yeah, I remember the wrestlers I met as a kid, and I remember the positive experiences, and you definitely remember the not so positive experiences. So yeah, I can definitely see that. There's so much here. Suvir08, the passion to wrestle. That's kind of an interesting one. And I certainly felt that growing up. Again, lots of, the art of storytelling. We've got fat slates, amazing promos, builds, matches where you don't know who could win, and theme songs. It's kind of interesting part, the theme songs. And that is 100% all a part of it, right? It's funny to think that years ago, like, wrestling themes were not a thing, right? It seems like such a big part of the show now, huh? Like, it really, really does. Dude, we have a lot of people here saying, things like, I love sharing something with my son, watching him fall in love with it. Awesome, much about the storytelling and everything else. Sean Brown 6767 says the cute designs on trunks.
Oh, there we go.
There we go. The ability to be lost in a supernatural world at any time, regardless of my situation. Supernatural is interesting. The complexity behind the visible I'm going to try this again. The complexity behind the visible simplicity. Simple for you to say. That's by Matsi Zandi. I think that's pretty interesting to think about. It is. It's like in its simplest form, it is very simple, right? Just good versus evil, two guys fighting, but there's so many more layers to that, right?
Yeah.
I've been a fan since I was 11, currently 38, and I'm still surprised and inspired by Michael James Carpenter. And that I feel like, for the most part, wrestling fans, you'll get people, I guess, that go for a phase of watching it, but I feel like the most part, wrestling fans are almost like wrestling fans for life, it seems, huh?
Mm-hmm. I think so, yeah. It would take a lot to make me be like, no, I'm going to give this part of my life up now.
Right.
It'd be a weird thing to kind of just like remove, I think.
Honestly, we have so much here of like people saying about like taking them on an emotional roller coaster. The actual good wrestling itself, it's so good. The competitive nature and the cool moves. So we're getting a lot of similar answers, and so many of them are saying storytelling and that emotion. And So it's funny, or the drama. Actually, Axel, the fearlist, says big meaty men slapping meat. And I guess, again, that could be a reason why you love professional wrestling. And I think growing up, being a wrestling fan isn't always the easiest. When people say, oh, you like that stuff with the two men in trunks pretending to beat each other up. It's like, well, yeah, I do, but not because of that, Dude, we have so many answers, and I wish that I could get through them all. I mean, I'm going to try and read a few more ones that are a little bit different. Aussie Boy says, how cool the belts look. Oh, this is a nice one.
You agree with that one, right? You're a belt fan.
Absolutely, yeah. I've actually got two similar answers here. Got the friendships I've made, even though it's very few, and that was from the Flip Gordon, which I thought was sweet.
There we go.
Also, the friendships that will last a lifetime, from Larry Dallas, another great guy. The hype and entrance theme gives you before a match, from Giant Tom. Yeah, I would completely agree with that. Being able to be an arsehole to people with the excuse that it's a gimmick, from Stunning Sam DV. He's an Italian pro wrestler, I believe, that I wrestled a little while ago in Austria. So
there we go.
Yeah, that is. And I think for me, as a professional wrestler, the villain character, I don't really like to use the word character, because it is something that is within me. And when I switch on, I am the villain Marty Skell. That is not who I am, every minute of every day at all. But just like I was saying about Hogan, like as soon as I go through that curtain, somehow it's just something that I can switch on. And for me, I'm not playing a part. For me, it's a shoot. Do you know what I mean? Like that is me. That is my character. And that took obviously a long time to work out. And I honestly think the best wrestlers and all the greatest wrestlers of all time, they treated it like a shoot in the head. And obviously, I think it's best when wrestlers are able to be able to switch on and switch off, which I feel like I definitely can. Some people say like, oh, Ric Flair just didn't know where Ric Flair and Richard Flair started. You know what I mean? Began and ended. But if you look at the best wrestlers of all time, they treated it like a shoot. Stone Cold Steve Austin used to always say that. Bret the Hitman Hart was like that. All these top wrestlers. When Roman Reigns walks through that curtain, he's Roman Reigns. He is the tribal chief. He believes he is the top man in that arena, and he is. So, yeah, just kind of gone on a little waffle there.
Nothing wrong with that.
After me reading out some of these responses, like I said, it seems like the storytelling is the main answer.
Big aspect, yeah.
So you do wonder, like, should there be more of this storytelling in wrestling now? Maybe there is, maybe there isn't. I would like to hear from the fans what they think about that. Sam, I'm going to ask you, what do you love about professional wrestling?
The EastEnders / Power Rangers comment is mostly, I'd feel like, closely aligned to how I feel. And it just comes down to, and I said this on our first NXT episode, and I actually feel like NXT does do this very well, is I like the format and the concept of soap operas. And again, I know, like, if you're in the US, you don't have them, you may not really like understand that, but it's just something that's very familiar, and it's very nice to just tune in every week to a thing, and it's just highly dramatic. The difference is the ones in the UK, like the ones in Australia actually are kind of more like pro wrestling, I'd say. They're more bombastic and movie-like. The ones in the UK are just like very downbeat, very grounded,
mundane,
honest, and mundane, and honestly depressing, especially EastEnders. So it's like, where do I go then to get my fix of that kind of style and format? But like basically a soap opera, but instead of the mundane, it's more closely like a Saturday morning cartoon. Like, where can I even go to get that? And there's only one answer, and that's pro wrestling. And it's as simple as that for me. It's like we said, and like everybody said, these larger than life characters doing a soap opera. They look larger than life. They are physically larger than life. They act larger than life, and they're in wacky situations. And then on top of that, we were boys, right? When we first watched it, it's like the violence, like the cartoon violence, the Looney Tunes style violence. Like it all ties together into this just like this perfect package for someone like me. And even down to when I was a kid, I don't know if this would age well, but when I looked at, the wrestlers and the female wrestlers or valets or divas as they were back in the day, like I was like, we don't have people like, look at these women. Like I've never seen anyone like that in the UK. It's like, even like the women are just like these, everyone's like magnificent and bizarre and larger than life. And it's just like this weird realm where everything's turned up to 11 and it's captivating. And yeah, so for me, it's that. And I haven't really lost that. I mean, I feel like, when we grow up, we all lose like a little bit of something. But like, honestly, when the other comment about it's like brings me back to my childhood, it's not necessarily nostalgia, although there is a big part of that. It's like, there's some things in my childhood where I feel like, I want to be a kind of child again, even though I'm an adult for like an hour. What's wrong with that? And what lets me kind of sink back into that, maybe video games to a certain extent, but even they're getting too serious now. I think it's wrestling. I really do.
And the video games is a good example because I loved video games as a child. But again, I wanted the larger than life video games. I wanted to be Sonic the Hedgehog I didn't want to be there, but
yeah, you wanted Mario, to play as those
plumber jumping on mushrooms. That's crazy and larger than life. Then when it became all serious and Metal Gear Solid and just real life, I'm like, I'm not so interested anymore. Do you know what I mean?
No, I agree. Well, I would say like Solid Snake is also larger than life, and Metal Gear is kind of larger than life. I understand your point, and especially in gameplay where it's like a second job. All these games are like a second job now. Just the same stuff over and over again, like 80 hours. It's like it's definitely lost some magic. Whereas wrestling, I honestly feel like, for me at least, it hasn't.
So, why do I love professional wrestling? Despite us discussing it for the last near 45 minutes, I feel like my answer is going to be that I don't know. And the reason why I say that is because it's funny. Like I didn't find wrestling. I feel like wrestling found me. There was no reason for me to get into it. It wasn't like it was pushed upon me. It wasn't like I had an older brother. It wasn't like it was super popular in school when I found it. It wasn't like, obviously I wasn't born into the business, anything else, but I just happened to stumble across professional wrestling. And just from the moment that I saw it, I was just completely and utter hooked and have been ever since and just obsessed with it since. And I don't know why. It's kind of like, why does anyone like anything? I guess I couldn't really tell you. Do you know what I mean? I often think that, like, why did I fall in love with this and everything else? And it's because when you look at it from the outside, like this whole thing is bizarre and it's its own unique and wacky world. But for whatever reason, like I said, I didn't choose it. Maybe it chose me. Like I just fell in love with it, but I couldn't even. I mean, all these reasons that people have given, all great answers. But for whatever reason, it just completely captivated me. And honestly, I with wrestling, you can go through tough times with it and things not necessarily go your way and everything else. And sometimes I find myself correcting other wrestlers when they'll just be like, ugh, wrestling or something like that. And I'll say, hey, like, don't blame the business. Do you know what I mean? Like, wrestling is the thing that you love and wrestling is the thing that is provided for you. And, you're not entitled to any, like this business owes you nothing. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Like, sometimes things don't go your way. Yeah, sometimes people could be assholes, but don't like speak about the thing that you fell in love with in that negative light. Do you know what I mean? Like, again, like it owes you sort of nothing. Do you know what I mean? And it's kind of up to you to see yourself through it. And for me, like, it's wrestling is my baby. It's in my veins. And I just have no idea how it got there because my parents certainly weren't into wrestling whatsoever. But it's funny, and as well, being the kid growing up when everyone else was in love with football and I was in love with wrestling, it's kind of like, why is that? And my answer is, I just don't know. And I think sometimes like what gene was, what was put in my brain to like wrestling. And I do not know. but I do know that I definitely love professional wrestling. So I hope if you're listening to this podcast, chances are that you love professional wrestling. If you love this show or love this podcast, then please give us a 5-star review on the Apple Podcast. We will read it out. We haven't read any out for a while. It's probably because we haven't had many people giving us reviews. It seems like people are happy to listen, but don't give us the reviews. But please, 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 if you
that makes us cry.
Yes, it does. Please, if you can take a minute out of your day, just write us a nice review. That would really help us with the algorithm. And also, of course, as always, please follow us on the social media at The Villain Pod. We're on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. That would be very, very pleasant. But yeah, Sam, I enjoyed that positive chat today. It
was lovely. Yeah, no, it was really, really nice. And it also got me thinking, like, I didn't really think before why, like, there'll be so many kind of like factors into this. You know, it seems like off the top of your head, it might be a very easy thing to answer, but like it's so many things to so many different people, and it is to me as well. And I will still say, you know, I feel like for a certain type of child, wrestling, which like I feel like you're in this camp and I'm in this camp, that type of kid, wrestling is a very attractive prospect. And when you get into it from an early age, it's just like a part of what you greatly enjoy. It's just with you from that point.
It's definitely a very much love it or hate it, or love it or completely indifferent to it type deal, I'd say. Do you know what I mean?
I'm glad we love it, you know? Like, I like it when I've got a thing, you know?
Yeah,
I just
agree.
love, and I'm passionate about it, so it's pretty cool. Absolutely. All right, then. That was awesome. I think that is it for today, though. And have a good week. Till next week.